Hello, friends, clients of JLW Immigration Law Group. I am Jennifer Walker Gates, board certified immigration attorney. I am coming to you today in this video to talk about traveling while your green card application is pending. Whether you are applying for adjustment of status or you're waiting on a waiver and a consular process, we've been hearing a lot from people who need to understand the traveling situation. It's a little bit like the wild, wild west out there right now. And so if you are wondering about that, this video is for you. Before we get into today's topic, I want to take a moment and ask you to please like, comment, share, subscribe to our channel. We are here every Wednesday at noon to share information with the immigrant community about your rights, your responsibilities, what is happening in the field of immigration law, how to keep yourself and your family safe and secure inside the United States. So please help us get the word out. Share the video if this is helpful. Like it. Leave us a comment. I do respond to those. And subscribe to our channel, and that will make sure that you are always informed when there is a new update. So let's see. Let's talk about travel. There have been a lot of people asking questions about this because, as we've seen in the news, traveling has become a little bit more risky than what we may have seen in the past for people who either have a visa already, they already have a green card, or they are potentially traveling while waiting for their green card to be approved. Now, there's travel outside the US has some very specific requirements for anyone who is applying for a green card. Specifically, if you travel outside the US, you can't come back unless you already have permission when you leave. In other words, if you leave the United States while your application is pending, your application might be considered abandoned, and then you might not be able to come back to the United States until you complete like a whole other process going through the consulate or something like that. So if you are applying for adjustment of status and you need to travel internationally, it is very, very important to make sure that your advance parole document is already approved and issued to you. If you are waiting on an advance parole document, if you have filed for an application for an advance parole document, those processing times right now are between 8 and 11 months. So it can take quite some time for those permissions to be granted for someone who is applying for their adjustment of status. In those cases, you might be able to request what's called an emergency advance parole. That process involves probably having to pay a separate filing fee to go file, again, another application in person at a USCIS office. And there have been some rumors floating around among immigration attorneys that USCIS field offices won't be processing these anymore. However, I haven't seen anything official. And until we see something official, we continue to push and try and apply, because you only are guaranteed to not get something if you don't ask. There aren't any other guarantees in our field or in any field of law then besides, like, you don't get something if you don't ask for it. That's the only thing that we know 100%. So if our client has an emergency and needs to travel, we will often take them with an application and a filing fee to the USCIS field office to make that request. And in the past, we have been able to obtain those emergency permits within just a couple of hours of making that application in person. You do need evidence that there is a real emergency. Someone is actually extremely ill, facing surgery, hospitalized, potentially facing death. Something like that needs to be involved in order for them to grant that emergency travel permit. But until we see an official announcement otherwise, um, they might not get approved, but we're going to continue to try. So that's really important to understand is if you are applying for adjustment of status, you need a travel permit, an advance parole already approved before you leave the US to avoid having your application considered abandoned and then denied as abandoned. If you are traveling uh, inside the United States, it is a little bit more risky right now than it has been in the past, as we've seen. That's for a number of reasons. Local law enforcement in different parts of the country might be trying to cooperate with ICE, might be looking for people to pull over to then turn into ICE, or they might just be willing to turn people into ICE if they are pulled over for some reason. Um, and it really varies from area to area throughout the country. And it's difficult to predict where that could be happening and where it won't. It's also definitely true that within 100 miles of the southern US border and the northern US border, ICE can basically stop people and ask for ID and proof of status at any time. So that's been the case already for a long time. And so it's very important to keep that in mind as you are considering travel, that you may be asked to present evidence that you have permission to be in the United States if you're within 100 miles of the southern or northern borders. Um, so we have seen that there's a lot of news stories right now about people who have a visa or who had a visa, who have a green card or had one, coming into the United States through international airports and getting detained, having their phones confiscated, attorneys, immigration attorneys, having their phones and computers confiscated by border agents. And in some cases, those people have also been detained. In some cases, they've actually been returned and deported straight from the port of entry at the international airport. Those headlines are a little intimidating and a little scary. And we can see from the news, from the data, I was reading some reporting recently that tourism to the United States is definitely taking a hit. It's down, I think, 10% globally almost, and since January, and it is especially taking a hit from Canada. It's down about 20%. However, it's not gone 100%. What that means is that, a lot of people are still traveling to the United States on a regular basis, and we're not seeing headlines about the majority of those cases. So, is there more risk? Yes, there is. Are people still doing it successfully? Yes, they are. So, it's just really important to keep in mind if you are traveling into or out of the United States that your electronic devices may be reviewed. The border agents do have the right to ask you to unlock your electronic devices and let them look at it. If you refuse, they have the right to confiscate your devices for at least a couple of days. They may then try to get a warrant to actually break into your device and search it. In order to do that, they will need good cause. They can't just do that randomly, but if they think there is something going on with you criminally or for some reason that may implicate what they're calling foreign policy concerns, they might, give you some more trouble. So if you have been active on social media, criticizing the Trump administration, criticizing the war in the Middle East, criticizing the government of Israel, standing up for Palestinian rights in particular, those individuals have been targeted for review of their electronics and for removals from the United States, even when they had a visa, even when they had a green card. So it's really important to be careful as you're traveling through the international border into the United States to ensure that your devices are locked down and closed down and that there isn't any real good cause for anyone to get a warrant and search them. If you don't have permanent residency, but you just have a visa, when you're coming in, the risk is a little higher. People who are permanent residents have more rights to come into the United States than those who just have a visa. People who have a green card, who have permanent residence, can still be detained, can still be questioned, and can still have their items confiscated. US citizens can still have our electronics confiscated and reviewed. So, yes, more risky, important to take precautions, ensure that your items are locked. Anything that is confidential and you don't want looked at, you need to make sure that it is protected, or potentially travel with a different kind of device than the one that you typically use. Um, as an immigration attorney, I'm carrying a lot of confidential client data. When I travel through that international border at this point, I will be traveling with kind of substitute devices, just to make sure that the data that I hold on behalf of, thousands of clients is safe and protected, and not put at risk, um, as is my job as an immigration attorney. I am obligated professionally to protect client information to the best of my ability. So I'm just not even going to travel with it. Most people don't have that level of security that they need to observe. So often you can just simply lock down your devices, just bearing in mind they could be confiscated if you don't turn over your password. If you do turn over your password, understand that anything that's on your social media or on your device may be seen and looked at. So if you have anything on there that could seem compromising in any way, that needs to be removed, certainly immediately, before, and definitely before coming through an international border. Finally, if you are applying for your green card through the I-130 consular process and waiver process, you're most likely not eligible to get advanced parole. And maybe if you also have DACA, you can get advanced parole through DACA. We are seeing approvals of DACA advanced parole still. And so that is still an option for DACA holders. Definitely encouraged, if you have never had the opportunity to travel on advanced parole as a DACA, definitely reach out to an attorney that you trust to talk about that option, because having that lawful entry can make a huge difference in the amount of time it takes you to get to a more stable, more permanent, more long-term status. However, if you're going through the process with an I-130 green card application that's going to be handled ultimately at the consulate, you don't qualify for advanced parole. And so international travel, really, it has to be taken deeply into consideration. If you travel outside the United States, while you have that waiver pending or before it's approved, you have to wait to get that consular appointment before coming back, or you could trigger an unlawful presence bar. You could trigger what's called the permanent bar, and that can lead to the inability to get status through your family members forever, unless you spend 10 years outside the country. The permanent bar is one of the harshest penalties in the immigration law. It's one of the provisions of the immigration law that leads to most people not being able to qualify for lawful status. And we have videos about the permanent bar in our YouTube channel, so definitely go check that out if you need to understand whether that applies to you or not. But if you're going through the consular process, you probably don't qualify for advanced parole, so international travel is probably off the table for you. As far as domestic travel, again, really important to just bear in mind that you could be faced with more enforcement in this moment. Typically, historically, more immigration enforcement hasn't necessarily meant zero due process, where people can just be picked up and thrown out of the country immediately. Unfortunately, we are seeing a less respect for the right to due process in the law. And there is a bunch of litigation happening about that. In other words, people have been scooped up and thrown out when they shouldn't have been. And there are a lot of lawsuits pending about that. So it's really, really important to be extra careful right now if you don't have lawful status, if you don't have a driver's license. It's really, really important to take into careful consideration before you travel. Talk to an immigration attorney about what could happen. Have an emergency plan. If you do have to travel, just really make sure that you have done your due diligence to understand the likelihood of passing a checkpoint, the likely outcomes of an immigration detention, and how you will handle that situation if it does arise, to be in the best position possible to protect your rights, your family, and your future. I am happy to answer any questions if any are coming in. I don't see any at this time. Please, again, like, share, subscribe. We are asking everyone to please like, share, subscribe, because it helps people find us and find this information more easily. Again, we will be here next Wednesday at noon. We will be here each Wednesday, almost without exception. Occasionally, things come up that, as everyone can see, I'm all by myself today. My partners and the other attorneys are not with us because they're in court, they're at USCIS, they're in conferences, they're in meetings. So things come up, but usually at least one of us can be here to share vital information with you guys. If you need help with your specific case, please call us. 512-633-1785 is our number in Austin. One of our team can schedule you with me or any of the attorneys in our firm to talk specifically about the particulars of your case so that you can get the information you need to be successful in your process. And you can also schedule with us directly from our website. jlw.law is our domain. You can click a button there to schedule with me or any of the attorneys in our firm directly on our calendars from our website. We are always here and honored, happy to provide as much guidance and support as we can to the immigrant community. We appreciate you. We are grateful that you are in the United States. We recognize that you add enormously to our quality of life, our economy, our culture, our society, our communities. So thank you for choosing to make a life in the United States. I'm sorry that it's not a friendlier and more welcoming place right now, but please know that many of us deeply appreciate and are grateful for you and everything you bring. So with that, we will see you next week at noon on Wednesday, right here on our YouTube and Facebook channels. Please join us. And in the meantime, be safe. Take care. See you then.